Hello and welcome, all listeners, to Xavier Newswire Live, the radio show that will catch you up on all the Xavier news from Ledgewood Drive to Dana Avenue and beyond. Today is October 5th, and we are bringing the show to you live on XUFM. I'm your host, David Ludwig.
And I'm your host, Will Pembroke.
And in this episode of Newswire Live, you'll get to hear the Newswire multimedia crew bring you the rundown on the Supreme Court vacancy with guest Dr. Sean Rhiney, director of the Eigel Center, and our second edition of Inside Newswire featuring the op-ed editor, Charlie Gestalder. Before we get right into things, we do have an exciting announcement, and that is that phone lines for Newswire Live are open. If you would like to come on air and share your opinion, your hot take, or anything else, well, that's enough from me now, so let's get right into the show. At this time, I'll turn it over to Chloe Salveson.
President Donald Trump nominated law professor and federal appellate judge Amy Coney Barrett to replace the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on September 26th. Judge Barrett, born in 1972, grew up in a suburb of New Orleans as a devout Catholic. She graduated first in her class from Notre Dame Law School. Soon after, Barrett became a judicial law clerk for the U.S. Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit and Associate Justice Antonin Scalia of the U.S. Supreme Court. From 1999 to 2002, Barrett worked for a boutique law firm that soon merged with the Texas-based law firm Baker Botts. There, she worked with the well-known case Bush v. Gore, providing assistance for Bush's representation during the lawsuit that spurred from the presidential election of 2000. Barrett has been a faculty member of Notre Dame since 2002 and has had her academic work published in many notable journals and law reviews. She's received Notre Dame's Distinguished Professor of the Year award 3 times. From 2010 to 2016, Barrett served on the Advisory Committee for the Federal Rules of Appellate Procedure by appointment of the Chief Justice. On May 8, 2017, Trump nominated Barrett to the United States Court of Appeals for the Seventh Circuit and has been on his shortlist for Supreme Court nominees since. If she is to be confirmed, Barrett will be the only Supreme Court justice with school-aged children. She's a mother of 7, 2 of which are adopted from Haiti. Barrett upholds originalism, statutory interpretation, and stare decisis. These principles regard precedent established in legal case as binding. In other words, Barrett strongly believes the courts are obligated to follow historical cases when ruling on a similar case. For example, when Barrett affirms that marriage and family are, quote, founded on the indissoluble commitment of a man and a woman, end quote, she notes that the landmark LGBT plus legal cases are binding precedents that she intends to follow. However, Barrett also believes Roe v. Wade is not immune to challenge and may be considered for overturning. She argues that case Planned Parenthood v. Casey, which redefines state recognition of abortion, proves that Roe v. Wade has not achieved the status of super precedent. Barrett's pro-life advocacy due to her Catholic faith is what sparks controversy in opposition to her confirmation to the Supreme Court. In 2006, she signed an anti-abortion ad publicly expressing her perspective on the topic. Nevertheless, in her 2017 confirmation hearing, Barrett stated that Roe is, quote, clearly binding on all courts of appeals, and so it's not open to me or up to me, and I would have no interest in, as a Court of Appeals judge, challenging the precedent, end quote. At the same hearing, she added, quote, it is never appropriate for a judge to impose that judge's personal convictions, whether they arise from faith or anywhere else on the law, end quote. Therefore, while she is the most popular among religious conservatives, Barrett plans to defend the intent of the framers and examine binding precedent when interpreting the Constitution if confirmed as a justice on the Supreme Court. So I'll start with the first question. What is your opinion regarding the replacement of the Supreme Court justices?
It's a process, and it is a process that is ingrained since 1789, that we, when we lose a justice on the court, in fact, it hasn't changed since 1789. We've always had 9 justices. And so when we have one, it's important that we replace it. There's a process that involves both the, if you think of the three branches of government, the president, the executive office, the legislature, Congress, Senate, and House, and then the Supreme Court is the third branch, right, the judiciary. So at least two of those three get to have input as to who that next judge might be. And of course, presidents get the privilege of nominating that person, but then they have to be approved by Congress as well. And so in that sense, this is just part of our process. I mean, the controversy that I'm sure most people are seeing is this notion of nominating a candidate here in the final months of President Trump's first term, regardless of whether he earns a second term or whether Vice President Biden comes on board. And of course, the controversy is because 4 years ago, when President Obama was trying to do something very similar, it was the legislature that actually blocked that ability to even confirm a justice. So I think there's a political piece to this that is absolutely a bit of a conundrum, and I think the legislature has made some arguments as to why they think they should be able to do this. The bottom line is it's about political power, and to some extent, even though I will tell you, and very much in my strong beliefs as an attorney, that the judiciary remains an independent body, and that is absolutely essential to the function of our democratic way of life. The function of our republic is that this of all offices, not president, not the Congress, is the body that, even though it's nominated by the sitting president, should remain apolitical, because it can't. It interprets. I mean, the singular job of the Supreme Court is to interpret our Constitution for us. Something that was written in 17, blah blah blah, many moons ago, right? And what's interesting, is that the justices are supposed to approach things fairly. So technically, you could say, it shouldn't matter, but it will swing the balance. Certainly, the balance of power. Part of what anybody who studies constitutional law understands is that many of the decisions are very close, 5-4, with 9 justices, 5-4, and that's the majority. And then the power of the judiciary is, even though the majority opinion controls, the dissents tend to also signal where we might go in the future. And so, when you look at a current slate of justices, and I had to take a look, you've got a pretty even mix of who they were appointed by. So the current justices go all the way back to George Bush Sr., so not George W. Bush. So there's one justice left from his presidency, and right now there's about 5 that have been appointed by Republican presidents, and 3 left that have been appointed by Democratic presidents. So another, if President Trump earns this, if the legislature passes on his nomination, you'll have 6 of the current justices appointed by Republican presidents, 3 by Democrats, and you'll have 3 by President Trump, which is more than any of the presidents since the time of Ronald Reagan, which is pretty significant when you think about it, that ability to appoint, that many. So and it's certainly, for those who are constitutionalists, it shouldn't matter, but for those who understand that the Supreme Court does impact policy, it has already started to raise issues related to voting, issues related to equal rights, issues related to choice. Things like that are issues that I think a lot of people are concerned that a court could swing. What I always tell my students is that may be so. You might certainly make some assumptions based on someone's partisanship or someone's. But again, the court's not supposed to actually care about that, and in some ways doesn't. I give as a great example Chief Justice Roberts, who was appointed by a Republican president, but has actually not sided with the administration in multiple decisions, and that surprised people, but it shouldn't, because he is a true scholar in the sense that he reads and understands the cases and interprets them as best that he can with his colleagues, and so he's been very much in the mix for his decision making. I think there's a fear that these certainly that this swing on the court will upset years of precedence. So I thought it was interesting. So you had asked about Judge Coney Barrett. So
Oh, yeah.
she has been on the appeals court since 2017. So she's been an appellate judge. So that's the second highest federal court in the land, the appellate courts. So she's been an appeals judge for 3 years. She was previously on President Trump's list when for the Supreme Court when Brett Kavanaugh was approved and moved on to the Supreme Court. And during that, so what we have as far as an insight, and I think this is really interesting and it's worth diving into, is she was part of a confirmation hearing for the appeals court. So before she got her position in 2017, she had to answer questions about, how would you rule, which is generally a terrible question to ask a judge, because judges generally, and rightfully so, can deflect that and say, I won't. But she's been asked, and I think it's particularly of interest to us, as a Catholic Jesuit university, you're a Catholic, how would you rule in something like Roe v. Wade? How would you rule, on some of these issues? And she has repeatedly said, that while she is religious, while she is a practicing Catholic, while she is part of multiple faith-based groups, not just organized Catholic churches, she's been pretty clear that she has to faithfully follow the precedents that are set by the court. So precedents are the laws that the Supreme Court has interpreted in the past. So if there's a Supreme Court decision, we call that precedent, and it generally should control until it's actually overturned or it's repealed. And if you think about it, that's the job of the court, right? They're interpreting the Constitution and they're interpreting any statutory construction. So they not only deal with the original legislature, right? The original Congressional Congress, that made our Declaration and our Constitution. But they look at any act of Congress now and they interpret it, especially if there's a challenge to it, or if there's a conflict between federal law and state law as well. That's the area where they get involved in state laws as well. So, you have to, ultimately you have to take on their face value what judges say at these hearings, because they are part of the confirmation process and that as well. So I imagine, it'll be, I'm not a political strategist, so I don't know how the House and the Senate will handle the confirmation hearings, for this judge that's been nominated. But I imagine they will get into some of the same issues that were asked of the judge when she was confirmed to the appellate court as well.
So I guess wrapping back up to the original question, do you think then that Trump is right in nominating Amy Coney Barrett?
I don't have an opinion on that.
Okay.
I think he's acting within his authority as president.
Okay.
The argument, and I think where the sort of the public shock is within this sort of hypocrisy argument, right? That this was not allowed for President Obama, and it was, there was a Republican-controlled Senate that would not confirm the candidate that President Obama wanted to move forward as well. So I can't say that it's right or wrong, because they're just following the process and procedure that they do. Unequivocally, they're attempting to do so in an efficient, expedient fashion to bring on someone. The court doesn't absolutely need that that ninth justice right now. It certainly helps, because remember, you and I both know that 9's an odd number, and that helps break ties. So that's the power of that ninth justice currently is if the court were to end up in a 4-4 deadlock, that's a bit of a challenge for us. So we want that ability to break ties. So it's a hard question to answer. So I always try to argue from the point of the law neutrally that, well, it's certainly within their rights. You could certainly make arguments that it's not following procedure and process that were established, but there are many arguments that both sides, both parties, whether they were controlling or not, have made made amendments to how we do this process as well. And and ultimately, it's that's why you have 2/3 of your government decide and confirm who the next judge is. So if the president and Congress decide that this candidate is the right candidate, even after the confirmation process, it's highly likely that she would be confirmed and be on the bench. And I'm not myopic. I mean, unequivocally, this will likely change the future. But as to how it will change the future, we don't know, because ultimately it depends on the cases that come before the court. What I was going to say earlier, what I tell my students is it's the fact pattern that comes before the court. So everyone's you have pro-choice advocates who are concerned about about Roe v. Wade as a holding opinion right now. Well, it would still take a fact pattern to challenge Roe v. Wade. So that's going to be a challenge of some state law, perhaps, and or the interpretation as well. So the Supreme Court can't automatically take up this issue. They can't say, we're going to decide and look and go back and look at this precedent, that was decided in the 70s, without a fact pattern, an appeal, a trial. It's going to have to go through our judicial process as well. And and that's important. I mean, it's important to understand that unlike policy, which can be made overnight, which can be dictated, and probably is more impactful on all of us from a day-to-day standpoint, policy could change right now. If the Senate and the House, at the state level or the federal level, wanted to change our policy about any of these things, they can do it. They can vote on it, and they have the power of their constituents, right? The court doesn't move that fast and that quickly as well. But like I said, I'm not narrow-minded in this. I know that unquestionably, when you take, I think actually what's more interesting is if Judge Coney Barrett is confirmed, she is. So what's really interesting, she was a law clerk for Justice Scalia. So Justice Scalia passed a few years ago, and he is. As much as culture has embraced Justice Ginsburg in such powerful ways, both from a legal standpoint, but from a cultural standpoint, and of course, the work that she did as a lawyer was amazing. The work that she, towards equality, the work that she did on the bench was, interestingly, largely from a dissent standpoint. She was often poking the court, and pushing it in different directions. But what is clear to me is that that Coney Barrett is much like her mentor, Judge Scalia. She's an originalist, so she interprets the Constitution as we're. This is, I guess, the best way to phrase this. She interprets the Constitution from the mindset of the framers. So she actually is part of a group of legal scholars who believe strongly that we can't look at it from a 21st century view and try to input what we think and feel into the minds of the framers. We have to actually, keep our the framework of the Constitution and its parameters within the actual group of men who decided, and made these opinions. And then that's where a lot of folks are critical of originalist or constitutionalist or strict constructionist is what they, there's different language to describe it. People are critical because as we have learned, the law has adapted to both psychological phenomena that we've learned. Science has changed the way we think about the law. I can give you a great example. There was a great case by Brian Stevenson, who is known pretty well as a civil rights attorney, and it was regarding juvenile justice and about executing or life without parole for juveniles. And a lot of the evidence that came into that, and this is just in the last decade, was about how youthful minds have not developed. And so one of the most important things in the law is that you have intent. If you're going to commit a criminal act, you usually have to have intent. For murder, for example, you have to intend to do something. And science has told us that youthful brains aren't even developed at 18. And so holding people accountable for the intent to do things and or putting them into prison without any chance of parole is in violation of cruel and unusual punishment, because they haven't fully even developed as an adult. And so science has changed the way we think about things, and culture has changed things. Brown v. Board was at the beginning of the civil rights movement, for example. Separate but equal. I mean, we had legalized racial segregation on the books, prior to Brown v. Board, prior to many of the amendments or many of the things that formed our Civil Rights Act of 1964. We had legalized racial injustice. There's no other way around it. And so our understanding of humanity, our understanding of people's rights, our understanding of women's rights, I mean, that was Justice Ginsburg's, while I think her work was really intersectional, it affected gender, race, ability, any aspect of equality, but she helped change law around women's rights because women were not accorded the same rights as men, and we're talking about the 70s. I mean, this is not. It might be a distant past to you, but this is the era that I grew up in, and the fact that my mom didn't have the same rights, as men, I find shocking to the conscious. But it was this understanding, interpretation of our law that we said, the framers had a very different view, and the framers, slavery was still in the Constitution, even though it was abolished by the 13th Amendment. For anyone who's seen the 13th, the documentary, you realize that our entire prison system was likely informed and founded by parts of this notion that African Americans could be imprisoned and given penal punishments, work following the end of slavery. So hopefully, there's this mix, and that's what's good about the court is not everybody's an originalist or constructionist. Some people are much more open in their interpretation, but that's the whole why we have to have faith in our Supreme Court to begin with. Is you want these 9 people to have these arguments, you want them to analyze it in the most neutral way possible as the law, and so that's why I think it's hard. It's easy to make assumptions about any judge before they go there, but I think people were making assumptions about Chief Justice Roberts before, and I think while he's to some if you are liberal and or Democratic, you might take exception with some of his decisions and or some of his votes. There are things that I think really surprised a lot of people who weren't conservative about his approach. And he is an adherent to the Constitution, and he tries to stay above the politics in the fray, even though he was nominated by a president. And that's, of course, how it should be as well. And so, all we can do is hope through this process, whether this confirmation hearing goes through or not, which I think is really more of a political strategy. And I think everything I understand about the confirmation process is that it likely can, because it's based on power. It's based on who has the majority right now, which, it's a conservative, Republican-controlled Senate right now, and so they can call the question. There can certainly be votes against, but it's pretty hard to do as well. I do think it's fun too. I was watching the other night Justice Ginsburg's 1993 confirmation hearing.
Oh, interesting.
And it's really worth, if anybody really wants to dive into this, it's really worth watching, and I'll tell you why. Because because Senator Joe Biden is leading the confirmation hearing, which is really cool. The current, our former vice president and the current presidential candidate led her confirmation hearing. But I was particularly taken by the collegiality of the confirmation hearing. Both the lead Republican senator and Senator Biden, the exchanges were positive. The questions were great. There were critical questions for Justice then a D.C. Circuit Court judge. That's what Judge Ginsburg was before she became a Supreme Court judge. Great questions about the decision she had made as a D.C. Circuit Court, but it was collegial, and I don't remember what the vote was, but it seemed very positive. It's just when you compare, especially in your lifetime, you've seen both Gorsuch and Chief Justice and Brett Kavanaugh. These are the 2 confirmation hearings you've seen as a young adult, if you've seen any of them, and they both were vitriolic. They both, certainly rose significant issues of concern from both sides, both partisan sides, and that is, I think, more a reflection of the time we're in right now. Where our politics, are much more confrontational. And much less about policy and more about position, right now as well. And so, I'll leave the discussion of that to, our amazing, political scientists, many of our faculty who study this and understand it. They can talk about this at length. What I hope, as a lawyer, is that at the end of the day, we still have this ability to take each decision fairly. And that's why I think it's important to look at confirmation hearings, because you will see, most likely, people, senators or members of the committee try to pin down a judge on an opinion. And I think as much as it's, nice to know that, that this is someone's opinion, I don't think it's fair, because it's a fact pattern. What you do want to hear them say is they will follow precedent. And that's what Judge Coney Barrett has said in her past hearings, that she would follow the precedent of the court. Of course, that doesn't mean the right fact pattern might change, her understanding and interpretation as a vote, because she gets one vote just like every other justice would if she were confirmed.
Welcome back, listeners. You just heard an interview with Dr. Sean Rhiney by Chloe Salveson. Dr. Rhiney is the director of the Eigel Center, and he so graciously accepted the opportunity to interview. Unfortunately, he could not be here tonight, but he was able to do that pre-recorded interview. Reminder, if you're just tuning in or if you forgot, we do have phone lines open tonight if you want to call in and offer your opinions on the Supreme Court vacancy or anything else. We are going to give you a few minutes or a little bit of time before the intermission starts to call in and give your thoughts. Welcome back, listeners, from Intermission. If you have any thoughts or feedback for the Newswire multimedia crew, send them to xaviernewswire@gmail.com. Once again, that is xaviernewswire@gmail.com for any of your questions, suggestions, comments, or concerns. You can also find Newswire Live episodes and segments on YouTube. Search Xavier Newswire to find our channel if you missed anything. Every week, Newswire Live is updating listeners on the status of COVID-19 on campus. As of October 4th, there are 30 cases in the Xavier community. This is down from 41 just 3 days before that. 16 cases are students isolated on campus, and 11 are isolated off campus. 3 are Xavier employees. As of October 1st, there are 20 students in quarantine on campus and 116 students in quarantine off campus. Now, for our second edition of Inside Newswire, we would like to welcome the op-ed page editor, Charlie Gestalder. Welcome, Charlie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's always a joy. We've had you on a couple of times before, and the interviews have always been great. Friend of the show, Charlie Gestalder. So, Charlie, can you kick us off by just giving us kind of a day in the life of a page editor?
Day in the life of a page editor. Okay, I'll do a day in the life on a Wednesday of a page editor.
It's the best day of the week.
Wednesdays are when we put the Newswire together. Those are production nights. So just take a few steps back. I'll often have, if I'm going to get articles from people, I'll send out an email normally on a Sunday night. Not a Sunday night, sorry about that. On a Thursday night, and I'll try to receive my articles by Sunday, go through them, maybe send some feedback to the writer, like this argument is unclear, things along those lines. And then on Wednesday, fingers crossed, we'll have my 4 pieces that would be published. I have to send them through copy editing to go over grammar and syntax, everything. And then after that, I can start putting them into InDesign and going through just actually making it all look pretty and like a newspaper.
So being the op-eds editor, you definitely get a lot of different takes, a lot of different opinions. Would you say generally that you have to spend more time editing down, or you have more instances in which there needs to be significant change than other editors, or would you say that you actually have it less because it's someone's opinions and it's not something you have to edit as much?
Significantly less, actually. Part of that, so there's this concept of editorializing, which is often spoken about in the Newswire. So if you're writing for, say, Mo over in World News, you can't have any opinion at all in there. And if you do, it's a problem. It has to be addressed. They have to fix that. With me, it's all opinions. Yeah. And also, I mean, it comes down to, it's actually like an ethical question, because I can't really change what the writer is saying. I can't necessarily go in and like, oh, well, I think it would sound better this way, because it's their voice and it's my job to give them an outlet to be heard. So significantly less compared to other editors.
Could you go more into what is that line between correcting something maybe grammatically or clarifying something? What is the line between that and changing what they're saying, compromising that voice that they're trying to put forth in their article?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's always easier with, say, grammar, or we mentioned the copy editors. Sometimes I'll get papers back and they'll have highlighted a sentence and just leave a question mark. I'm like, okay, well, if the 5 people in there didn't know what that means, that must be an issue. And sometimes that's just a matter of moving a word around or adding a word to make the thought complete, and that's okay. But unless there's like an actual issue, unless something doesn't make any sense grammatically or just in general, I really try and avoid going in and making any changes to that.
Okay, very interesting. You, from what I heard, and from what I think we've all heard, is you have put out a campus-wide op-ed prompt. Could you go into what that is?
Yeah, so this is something I've been trying to work on, or I've been working on for a little while now. I've put out a campus-wide opinion prompt. This first one is, how does racism manifest at Xavier, if at all? And students of any background can submit, I believe it's 300 to 500 words about it. I'll likely be publishing 4 of them, 4 pieces in not this current week, but the week following. Those flyers are up currently in a number of the buildings on campus. I realize I forgot to put them up in Gallagher, which might be why I'm lacking in some of the emails now. But yeah, I'm really, really excited for that.
And where can they submit that to you?
They can send that either to the Xavier Newswire email or to my Xavier email, gestalderc@xavier.edu, and I know there's no way they'll know how to spell that off of me saying it.
You can spell it.
That is gestalderc@xavier.edu.
Wonderful. All right, Charlie. So we like to do a thing on the show, as you've heard, called Hot Takes.
Mm-hmm.
As the opinion editor, you are probably the most qualified person to come on this show and give a take.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd like to give you a second to ruminate on a potential hot take. I will start. I was driving.
Actually, before we 5 seconds before we go into
go for it.
If our listeners have any hot takes or whatever that they want to send to the Newswire, yes, call in. Clearly, once again, the number is 937-690-9319. If they have something they want to send to you, should they send it to that same email?
Yeah, they can just send it to my email, or they can swing by the office even and speak to me.
Perfect. All right.
So, I was all good. We love the plug. I was driving by down by the soccer field this weekend, and I was thinking, Xavier is obviously very well known for its basketball. Mm-hmm. Basketball games are a ton of fun. We all love to go to them. That's well known. That's probably a cold take at this point. Mm. I was driving by the soccer field, and I'm like, you know what I really miss? The women's soccer team. Really miss those games. Like they're so engaging. The team's so good. I really miss watching them. I miss just being able to go down and lie on the turf field above it. It's sweet. You just walk right down there, you sit, and you just watch soccer, and it's great that they're really good, and it just really made me miss being able to view that on a consistent basis. It was a big part of my freshman fall. So that's my hot take. Women's soccer, we need you back right now.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think through some hot takes. I you guys had Will Rippey on recently, and
we did.
He discussed some video games.
Yes.
And so I live with Will, and in keeping with that, my hot take is that single-player games are significantly better than multiplayer games.
Interesting.
I agree.
Are you a big PvE kind of guy?
Potentially PvE. I just when I'm playing a video game, I like to, if I turn on Xbox or whatever, I like to sit down and just relax, kind of escape into some other world. And I feel like often games with multiple players, whether I'm using a headset or whether I'm fighting against them, it's too much of the real world. It's too much of that of everything that I want to avoid, I guess, when I'm playing video games.
How about avoiding talking to people? When I sit down to play Xbox, you know what I don't really want to do is talk to someone.
Exactly.
I just want to sit there and zone out. And even sometimes my roommates will come in and start trying to talk to me, and I'm like, I'm good. This is my time. I just want to be here. I want to play Xbox. It's just relaxing. Mm-hmm. It's a great way to get away from the real world. So I agree. That's a great take.
Exactly.
Wonderful.
I know you guys are both Xbox guys, so my hot take is PlayStation's better.
I think that's actually a very cold take right now.
Okay. No. It's just what I was. I don't have much of a preference. I played on Xbox before. I think I just prefer PlayStation because that's what I was raised on. Mm-hmm. I remember one of my earliest gaming experiences was I played the Lego games with my dad on PlayStation. That
Phenomenal.
was super fun. Yeah.
I have a quick question. Why would you say PlayStation's better than Xbox? I have no experience playing either, but I would love to know.
Personally, I've tried both, and I think I like the menu system on PlayStation is much more user-friendly, at least to me, probably because that's just what I was raised on.
Right.
But I find, and I like the PlayStation exclusive titles better. Xbox has Halo, and that is forever just a good game series.
Right.
It's critically acclaimed. It's a classic. It's a great game series. But Horizon Zero Dawn, PlayStation exclusive. Well, it's on PC now, but PlayStation exclusive. One of my favorite games ever. I played it to death. I'm trying to think. Destiny, not necessarily a PlayStation exclusive, but it did have some earlier content released and some PlayStation exclusive content, and I played death out of Destiny. I actually have Destiny 2 on PC now. And
Spider-Man also, right?
Yes, Spider-Man, Marvel Spider-Man, excellent game. I think
God of War, it goes on. The
MLB The Show's on there too.
Yeah,
there's a lot of them.
PlayStation exclusives, I think, even though Xbox has the occasional heavy hitters, and this has suddenly turned from a news show into a gaming discussion. Hot take, this is what Newswire Live was always meant to be.
Yes, it was. We got a bunch of gamers here. Well, I think it really boils down to three things. I think, first of all, the controller is what I hear a lot of people talk about.
PlayStation controller is very comfortable.
And bring PC into this discussion, too, because there are plenty of PC heads out there.
I'm a big PC guy as well. I have one in my room.
There's that. It's you brought up a really good point, too. It's what you were raised on.
Yeah.
It's almost like a religion.
Yeah.
It's like you subscribe you subscribe to the religion of Xbox or the religion of PS4 based on my parents when I was 11 years old bought me X.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that really plays a big role. My mic just fell. Just for those out there.
Yeah, sound of Will's mic falling.
So I think those are two really, really important points. And three, I just feel like it's games.
Yeah.
Like you said, whichever one has the exclusivity plays a big role into it too. So if you're really big into Destiny or you're really big into MLB The Show, then you're going to be more of a PlayStation person,
Yeah.
or vice versa. Chloe, do you have any more input to add into our
Yes.
gaming discussion here?
Oh, dear Lord. I have no gaming input whatsoever. Other than, do you agree then, Charlie and Will?
So for me, I actually considered, if I can find a PlayStation cheap, I would buy
Right.
one to play the exclusives.
Mhm.
The only thing keeping me tethered to Xbox and Microsoft, even though I know in many ways it's inferior, is that all of my games are on there. I own a lot
No,
of
I get
games
Right.
now, and I'm not going to
Yeah.
throw away my whole catalog.
Yeah, no, completely
So
understandable.
it's just,
Even buying like the aftermarket consoles is like over $200.
that's more than I'd be willing to spend.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So makes sense.
Well, especially in I think gaming was a hobby that a lot of people turned to during pandemic times.
Have to.
I remember some even Switch games that were a little newer released, but
Little
got sold
Nintendo
out.
action here.
Yeah.
Forgot to talk about
the
that.
we can.
the new Zelda or whatever, the Breath of the Wild. Was,
Yeah.
that was a big.
But I was gonna say during pandemic. Oh yeah. Hunter is telling me that I am going to lose my job, and Chloe is going to be our host now because she is carrying this conversation.
Oh, dear Lord. I have said nothing.
But some Nintendo games that got released over pandemic that got sold out very quickly were subject to a lot of price gouging on Amazon or whatever. You could not find anything. What should have been $60 was well over $200, and it was crazy.
As always, money's always a massive factor. So
Yeah.
that makes sense. David, do you have a hot take to finish us off, or did we just take up our segment?
That was mainly my hot take, is that I just prefer PlayStation. Hunter, what's your camp? Nintendo. Hunter's a Nintendo guy, confirmed.
There we go.
All right. That will take us out. So, listeners, I will see you at the outro. Thank you, Charlie. Once again, thank you.
Thanks again for having me.
Listeners, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today in this episode of Newswire Live. Thank you for tuning into the show today. If you have any questions, suggestions, comments, or concerns for the Newswire multimedia crew, send them over to us at our email, which is xaviernewswire@gmail.com. We would like to give a special thanks to Carolyn Youngquist, a senior music education major at Xavier, who produced the intro and outro music of today's show, as well as Rafael Krux for the use of his song Inspiration, which was what you heard during the intermission. At this time, we'd also like to give a shout out to our staff and guests who helped make this episode possible. Thank you to Managing Multimedia Editor Hunter Ellis and Multimedia Associate Editor and co-host Will Pembroke. Without you, this show would not be possible. Thank you also to Chloe Salveson, Charlie Gestalder, and Dr. Sean Rhiney for their contributions to today's show. It was what made this a wonderful experience from week to week. You can now find Newswire Live episodes on YouTube, segments as well. If you missed anything, just search Xavier Newswire to find our channel. But, of course, we would love to have you live, so don't miss our next episode, which, as always, is Monday at 7 p.m. Until next time, this is David Ludwig.
And Will Pembroke.
Wishing you a magical Monday evening and signing off.